Welcome to the first Tuesday in April. We appreciate you being here. If you're watching, we want to thank you for doing that. The Metro Nashville Network has been really kind to do all these things for us, and we appreciate it. The first Tuesdays are a lot of fun, and so I want to thank you for being here. Today we're going to have a really good one, and so I'll get to him in a second. The next first Tuesday, May 2nd, we're going to have Deborah Wilbrink. She's going to come and talk about time to tell your personal and family history. So she'll be coming to give us a few tips on that. She'll do a book reading, probably have her book here to view. And so that's coming up. We've had a pretty busy April in the archives. We started a new exhibit recently. I had it, Sarah. Wait a minute. No, there's so much stuff rattling around my head. Oh yeah, Navigate, Aviate, Communicate. The history of aviation in Nashville, Tennessee. Did I get close? All right, cool. I got close. We have an exhibit on that Sarah put together on Nashville aviation. It's amazing how strong aviation was here in the early days, and Nashville was quite a leader in the aviation field. First night flight, first airmail, a lot of firsts here. So come down and take a look at the exhibit. It's fascinating. So we've got that going on. That opened, last Wednesday. So it's up and running. It'll be up for about 2 months. And we have an exhibit in the art gallery downstairs on Tennesseans in the Great War. You know, this is the April 6th. This week is the 100th anniversary of the U.S. declaration of war against Germany. And so we're going to have an event down there to commemorate that. It'll start about 12:30. And then we'll have someone from the French consul will come and speak at 1:11. There was a reason they chose that. And so it's 1:11 will be the speaker. It will be in the gallery downstairs. The big piece is in the footsteps of Alvin York. There's a big piece of the exhibit on Alvin York. I got it a little early because it's really booked out through next year. We'll have that, and then in the back area, we have some materials on Nashvillians. Clarence Alford, some of the Nashvillians that fought in the war will have some of their materials down there. So those things are coming up. If you can come, I'd appreciate it. We're open on weekends, remember, so if you can do that. And now I'm going to turn it over to Brian Allison. You know, okay, we got a big crowd today, so Murder and Mayhem sells, I got to tell you. And so, you got a great story on somebody's nice car, but boy, you want to talk about somebody being shot in that car, man, it's fantastic. So we do that. So Brian has worked a long time on crime in this city, and he's been working really hard on crime. And oddly enough, it didn't start 5 years ago. And so we appreciate him being here today to talk about it. Nashville, as much as we don't want to be, we were a river town for a long time. And so river towns. So anyway, I will turn it over to Brian Allison with his book, Murder and Mayhem in Nashville. Yeah.
Appreciate it. Thank you. And what I'm going to be talking about today is really what I like to do is focus my talk on concentrating on the site that I'm at, the place I'm at. In fact, when I was writing the book, that was one of the key things I wanted to touch on with writing this was connect it to the living Nashville, connect it to the places around the city that are still reminders of the stories I'm talking about. Today I'm going to be concentrating on a couple of stories in particular and telling them in fairly good detail. They're mostly forgotten stories, and these two happen to be stories that the Metro Nashville archives were intrinsic in me telling. So I use their collections, I use their resources heavily in telling these stories, and they're fascinating stories, mainly because of the fact that they're forgotten. In another town, these might be still well-remembered stories, still part of the legend of the city. But Nashville does have that attitude of let's forget about what happened yesterday. And that's, in a lot of ways, that's kind of a historical amnesia. I think a lot of cities are like that, especially about the bad times. Nobody wants to remember that. But more than a lot, Nashville is like that. I've talked to many established historians about some of these stories. And usually the reaction I get was the reaction I had when I first found them, which was, that happened here? Why didn't I ever hear about that? It's the funniest thing. Even established historians haven't heard a lot of these tales. I was surprised that a lot of it was so underground. So we're going to concentrate on a couple of that still resonate today. Starting with, well, let's not do that. Let's try something else. That work? There we go. That'll work. We're going to start with...
Where was that last picture?
Oh, that last picture is still standing. That's the Silver Dollar Saloon. I forget, where is that? Is it on Broad? I think it is on Broad, yeah. But that's it right there. And it is definitely a Nashville photo. You can see their Gerst beer up in the prominently advertised. The Gerst Hall is still going today. That was probably taken around the turn of the century, around 1900 to 1910 there. And I've always wondered who the guy in the Panama hat is. That is just, he looks like, there was a character from Smokey and the Bandit that reminds me of that guy, and I can't remember who he is, character actor. But we're going to start with this story, which takes place about that time on the then mean streets of Nashville, Tennessee. The murder of Officer Benjamin Dowell. This picture was one of the wonderful things that came to be during the writing of this book. This came actually, and I do not have her name, I didn't write it down, that's so unprofessional of me, but from a descendant of Officer Dowell. I found it on Ancestry, and I contacted her and I said, oh my God, I would love to have that picture in my book. And then of course, you spy on people. You check her profile. She hadn't connected to Ancestry in 6 months. I was like, well, I'll never hear from her again. Sure enough, I never heard anything. Literally the day before my images were due to the publisher, she contacted me out of the blue. She said, I would be so honored if you would use that picture of it. She was directly descended of both Ben and Allie, the couple here. But this was the crime that really sparked Nashville's war with vice, sin, and liquor around the turn of the century. The demons that were fighting for Nashville's soul, as they would have seen it. Nashville was a rough town at that point in time. And Ben here was one of the cops that was standing in the middle of all this. He was actually born in Murray County in 1876. He lived in Tullahoma when he was a boy, and he moved to Nashville as a young man. And at the time he came here, at the time surely that all this is going on, Nashville was growing quite a great deal. There's a wonderful, from the National Library of Congress, photograph of the panorama of the city there. You can see some familiar things. The Union Station is now a hotel. The 10 sheds are gone over there on the side. The Polk Flats Apartments, that's where Polk Place, James K. Polk's house once stood. And there, under the bridge, yes, there's the Gulch right there. So if you're wondering why it's called that to this day, it was just a rail yard and a rough area at that point in time. This was the Nashville that Ben Dowell knew around 1900 when he was starting to make a name for himself and set up a career and a family here. At the time, he was actually working for the Nashville Gas Company as a collector. But in 1901, the Nashville Police Department made one of its periodic expansions. They hired 10 officers. You had to be a little connected in those days to get on the force, and evidently Ben must have known somebody because he was hired as a patrolman and started up with not the Metro PD. This was still the Nashville Police Department as it was up until 1978, I guess it was. The following year, and again, this is artifact of the times. He was 26 at the time he married Allie, the lady in the photograph. She was 15 at the time, but it seems to have been a strong marriage despite the difference in ages and her young age. They did have a son together. Newspapers, still in those days, oddly enough, as it might occur to us, still listed their addresses occasionally. They lived at 31 Academy Place. Can you imagine today listing a police officer and his home address in the newspapers? So a different world in 1900. But that's for a reason. It really was, in many ways, a different world. Thanks to Mack Sennett and Gilbert and Sullivan, you get this image of police work around the turn of the century as kind of goofy. And I mean, even to this day, I guess it's the funny helmet and the little walrus mustaches. You think of the Keystone Cops. You think of these guys as somehow being a little more innocent, that all they had to deal with was drunks in the gutters and kids stealing apples from apple carts. Truth of the matter is, police work has always been a brutal business. And in those days, really Nashville was no different from a lot of cities around America. The crime was usually confined to districts where it was expected to happen. The cops stood between those districts and the respectable districts. And that's pretty much how police work went through much of the United States at that point in time. And no different in Nashville. Dowell proved to be a pretty effective officer. He was only on the force for 2 years. He was, you can tell from his photograph, a burly young man, very capable officer. On at least one occasion, he stood off an entire mob with his revolver, fired 2 shots over their heads as he was trying to make a difficult collar and get these guys into the paddy wagon. On another occasion, he took part in a full-on Wild West shootout with another officer with the Webb brothers and exchanged shots with them. A shotgun, several revolvers were used. These guys shot dozens of rounds at each other. The paper reported that nobody was hit, and that's probably because the Webb brother that was carrying the shotgun was cross-eyed, and that may have something to do with it. But either way, I mean, this guy had drawn his gun at least twice. He was a big, tough dude. There was at least one accusation of excessive force when he was arresting a woman, but he was acquitted of any wrongdoing. There's little you can find negative in the existing records about Benjamin Dowell. Now, whether that's because he became a saint after his death or because he really was a good officer, it's hard to tell at this juncture. But those kind of accusations happen a lot in those days, and there doesn't seem to be a lot in the papers other than the image of a conscientious young officer. Certainly Nashville didn't have a pristine department, a lot of accusations of police corruption and brutality in those days, but he seems to have been apart from a lot of that. And at least on one occasion, when he was still doing the West End beat, he proved he could also have a heart and a brain. I think my favorite story I found, just to touch on it in the book, happened right here in front of Centennial Park, just about a few years after the exposition. 2 young African-American kids were playing. It was a hot summer day, and they decided that it would be a good idea to strip down bare naked and crawl into one of the fountains in the park and start cooling off, which of course attracted undue attention from passersby, and so they summoned an officer, and Officer Benjamin Dowell showed up to make the pinch. They saw him coming, and they saw 5-0 coming up toward them and took off immediately, running through the crowd of all these. Now imagine this, with the ladies with the large hats, the men with their bowlers, and these poor naked kids running wet and running through their legs. Dowell, on the other hand, is wearing a blue wool jersey, running or blouse, running up the street after them, calling them to halt. I think he finally, after a few minutes, realized he was causing more of a problem than the initial disturbance. So he finally literally did the truth thing and told the kids to come on in, and after a few seconds they trusted him. And he sat them down right there on the street and he said, "Guys, you can't do that, okay? You understand why you can't strip naked in public. Now, if I promise to let you go get your clothes, will you just go home?" And they did. No arrests made. It made the papers to everybody's amusement, and nobody hurt. And he diffused the situation, and hopefully the kids learned a valuable lesson. So he proved he could be a good officer and a rough one when necessary. And that's the image you're left with of Ben Dowell. And when you realize where he was and where he worked, you kind of are, you're left with you're left impressed by his attitude on that, because this is the district that he normally was assigned to, the infamous Black Bottom. And yes, it's a racial term. It was a racial time at that point in time. It was a largely African-American community. It was overrun with poverty, and with the poverty came crime and vice in spades. That's probably the roughest district in Nashville. Today we call it Sobro, just south of Broadway. But there between Lindsley and Broadway was really the heart of the worst saloon district in the city. There were several vice districts. Like I said, they expected them to remain confined into their districts. The Toffs went up to the Gentlemen's Quarter, right in the heart of downtown, where even today the Southern Turf Building, the Climax is being, I think it's the Climax, no, the Climax got torn down. The Utopia is about to be turned into a luxury hotel. Those were the heart of the Gentlemen's Quarter, where wealthy white men went to blow off steam. The poor African Americans were usually confined to Hell's Half Acre, which was north of the Capitol building. This was an interesting district because you almost get the sense this is the one that really touched off the reformers and those that were against vice. Because Black Bottom was different. It catered to anybody. Anybody with the green could come in there and get into trouble in that district. Gambling, prostitution, liquor, you name it. But a lot of these places, these joints around here, were called Black and Tans. And you can tell from the name what that implies. They serve both black and white customers, which really seems to have been the sticking point about Black Bottom. It was open to all comers, no matter who they were, as long as they had the money or could owe enough, could get into trouble owing somebody enough money in that district. A couple of these places were rough joints. There's some of the, I think I put Saul Cohn's place a little bit too far from where it was. I think it was actually further up here. But Saul Cohn became the king of Black Bottom. In fact, he had what was called a bucket of blood in those days. It was a combination grocery, saloon, and barbershop, which seems strange to us today. However, when you know the era, that makes sense. The groceries, they might have some crackers and cheese on the counter, but what they mainly did was sold liquor under the table. The saloon next door, you could go get drunk there, you could go to the saloon next door and get something to take home, and then the barber shop was a male domain. The barber shop is where you went to place bets, you went to talk about women, that sort of thing. It was a real rough joint. In fact, I believe it was in 1897, I may have the date wrong on that, but Saul Cohn actually killed his own barber, Bud Holmes, who was an African-American barber who worked for him. Cohn tried to cut him off from drinking and gambling, and he pulled a knife, and Cohn killed him right there on the spot. No charges filed. Typical. If you also get a sense that a lot of these places were, I guess in modern parlance, mobbed up. They made the right payoffs, and as long as the trouble didn't spill over into the civilians around them, it normally wasn't an issue. Over there on the corner, right across from the current Metro Center today, the Music City Center, Colo's Saloon, right about where that roundabout is today. That was the scene of another incident took place, typical incident, August of 1902. Bartender Harry Lehman shot and badly wounded a young man named Bert Thompson in a fight over Lehman's attentions to Thompson's cousin. There's some ugly undertones to that incident too. What seems to be the issue was Thompson is Irish Catholic, Harry Lehman was Jewish, and that seems to have been the issue between the two of them. At any rate, Thompson was mobbed up, as I said. He was the brother of Patrolman Ben Thompson on the police force, so he was immediately called to his brother's bedside. With all of that, Lehman still beat the rap. Thompson recovered. Lehman never did any time. In fact, Lehman later rose to head up the whole bootleg industry before he was gunned down in 1927. So this was Harry Lehman's debut on the scene. Thompson survived the whole thing, and we're going to meet him again because he's about to play a leading role in what was coming. Now, about the worst of this whole, I keep doing that. I wish I wouldn't do that. Let's do that instead. There we go. About the worst of this seedy world, right here, and by the way, that's the interior of one of these black and tan joints at that point in time, so you can tell not exactly luxurious surroundings in a lot of these places. They really were four walls with some whiskey barrels on them. So everybody knew where the crime was. A cop's job in those days was not to stop crime or solve crime. It was to contain crime to the right district. And as you can tell from just looking at Black Bottom, it was a rough district at that point. And the roughest light in the district was that gentleman. Wish I had a better picture of him, but so far that's all I've been able to come up with. Thomas Cox, 28 years old, good buddy of Bert Thompson, who Harry Lehman shot. He was literally just a thug with connections. He worked as a gambler, he was a bartender, he was an occasional enforcer for the liquor people. He'd already shot, by 1902, he'd shot 4 men in various scrapes. He had also killed a young piano tuner named William Freeman in a drunken fight in 1899. He was tried twice for that crime and saved both times by a hung jury. On another occasion, he was convicted of wounding a police officer in a fight on a bridge in 1896, and he got executive clemency. His appeal was denied the one day, the next day the governor pardoned him. That tells you a little bit about how the connections were going in Black Bottom in those days. A lot of these politicians were either liquor men themselves or they had friends in the liquor trade, and that was quite obvious to the citizens of Nashville. This is what was leading to this reform movement in the air at that point in time. Sometimes they were looked as stuffy blue noses today. They had a point. This was a really rampant kind of corruption that was going on. He was short-tempered, Tom Cox was. He carried a 41 Colt like that one around with him. He had an itchy trigger finger, and he had very few redeeming qualities. One of them was, if it is a redeeming quality, he was a good shot. The other was, he did love his blood relations. He loved his family. Not his wife so much. He was separated from his wife, but his sister was a little bit different. On one occasion, Cox was hauled in before the judge for busting up a brothel and breaking the fingers of the madam in the place by pistol whipping her. And of course, they were thinking, okay, it's a typical Tom Cox escapade, you know, and even you could tell reading this that they were anticipating a really good trial on this one. It never came to that. Turns out that during the testimony, Cox established to his lawyers that his sister, Nellie, had run away from home, and she knew the madam, so she hid out in the brothel just because of some family scrap. The madam kidnapped her, detained her in the brothel, and tried to force her to go to work for the house. So she kited a note out to her brother Tom, who literally kicked the door in, grabbed his sister at gunpoint, and started out the door. When she tried to stop him, he slammed the door on her, broke her fingers. The judge threw out all charges against Tom Cox on that occasion, turned to the madam from the bench, and he said, "You stay away from Nellie Cox. If I ever hear around your place again, I'm going to have you arrested," and put the end to that situation. So I always like to give the devil his due, so to speak. Tom Cox is a hard guy to find any sympathy for, but he did have friends, and he was fiercely loyal to them and to his family. And that seems to have been his ultimate fault. That was really what was going to lead to his downfall. Because ironically, it was Nellie Cox who was going to light the fuse to this whole tragedy. She married a saloon keeper named Owen McDonough in 1899, and it was her, really, more than anything else, that led to the instigation of what was coming. Started late in the afternoon of December the 6th, 1903. Benjamin Dowell was on patrol on Lafayette Street, north back in that direction from where this is. He was near the McDonough Saloon and Grocery, and he saw activity that led him to believe it was open, which meant they were violating the Sunday law. And selling liquor on a Sunday was against the law. So he approached the place to check it out. An African-American woman who worked as a cook there was standing nearby, and she immediately ducked back into the saloon, apparently to give the high sign that a cop was coming. So by the time he forced his way into the place, it was empty, nobody in there. So he had the cook arrested and started dragging her down to Will Hoyt's drugstore. By the way, no call boxes in Nashville. He had to go to the drugstore to call the paddy wagon to come pick her up. Owen McDonough wasn't at home when this happened, but Nellie was. And the second she saw Dowell starting to haul her cook off, she ran after him and started calling him every name in the book and cursing him out and everything. She followed him all the way down to Will Hoyt's drugstore, and finally, after witnesses said he acted with a great deal of restraint, but after taking enough abuse, he had Nellie McDonough arrested and bundled her into the paddy wagon for interfering with an officer and resisting arrest. As she went into the wagon, as they bundled her in, she said something that turned out to be very fateful, and forgive the language, but you can bleep it later if you want. "You're as good as in the graveyard. You're as good as dead. I'll make my brother Tom Cox kill you, you cowardly son of a bitch." That was not a threat to be taken lightly. Unfortunately, Dowell had probably heard this 100 times before. He doesn't seem to have taken it except at face value. He went right back onto patrol. When Cox showed up at the Central Police Station to bail his sister out, he took it a lot differently. In fact, she had changed her story by then. Like I said, most of the witnesses agreed Dowell was the picture of patience dealing with Nellie McDonough's tirade. Nellie, on the other hand, told her brother that he had not only cursed her out, he also slapped her. Well, you could see Tom's face go white at that one. He got visibly angry, and witnesses said that he told his sister, "Don't worry about it. I'll go at once and settle the matter." They said even Nellie looked frightened at the implications of what he just said as he stormed out of the place. He grabbed no one other than Burke Thompson, his good buddy, and they went wandering out, he said later, to take a stroll. He wasn't looking for Benjamin Dowell. They just happened upon him. It's interesting because I don't think he would have known Ben Dowell from Adam. He wouldn't have recognized him. But Thompson, interestingly enough, a few weeks earlier had been arrested by Dowell, and Dowell had clubbed him over the head with his nightstick during the arrest, which meant A, he could identify the officer, and B, he hated him with a passion. So it seems that when they found him standing outside Grace Presbyterian Church here, Thompson pointed him out and Cox went and walking up to him. Now today we call it the Lindsley Avenue Church of Christ. Same building, same everything, it's still standing today, and that's what's remarkable when you see these landmarks and realize this happened here, and sure enough, you're looking at a murder scene right there. Dowell stood where that X was, Cox walked up to about that point, And as the evening service was going on inside the building, there was a string of gunshots, and both men emptied their pistols at each other. Both of them were hit. Dowell lost the tip of his right thumb, and another bullet went completely through his stomach, one side to the other. He went staggering back toward the church. Cox was shot in the arm by his return fire, and he went staggering down Lindsley Avenue up toward the one-way sign, as that is in the photograph. And then he found Burke Thompson, and both of them hustled away. Literally, he came bursting into the church right in the middle of the evening service. They said it caused quite a sensation, you could imagine. This bleeding officer with a smoking .38 dangling from his hand, and he walked in and he said, "Gentlemen, I've been shot. Please, somebody take my pistol." And they did. They said, it seems to have surprised the newspapermen that the men went into a panic in the church and the women took charge and acted with discretion and calmness. But they took him into the Sunday school room, they laid him down, they called the ambulance from the city hospital. Allie, his wife, was contacted. This is where they took him. By the way, this is a photograph courtesy of the Metro Nashville Archives. He was taken here where he lived long enough to give a deathbed statement. Essentially, he said Cox had approached him, and without a word, without even drawing his pistol, he opened fire from inside his overcoat pocket and just emptied the pistol at him. He called it, quote, "as cowardly a trick as a man ever did." And that was about the last thing he ever said. He slipped into a coma, and just past 7 p.m., December 7th, 1903, Benjamin Dowell died. As you can imagine, this was going to turn into quite a sensation among the reformers. His funeral took place at Grace Church, where he had been shot, and it turned into as much an a temperance crusade as it was a memorial to the fallen officer. Cox, on the other hand, he made it to a streetcar a few blocks away. We're not dealing with Moriarty here. This is not a criminal trying to cover his tracks. This is a guy who thinks he's mobbed up and can pay off the right people. So he made very little effort to hide himself. When he got on the streetcar, the conductor noticed he was bleeding and that Cox was staggering and Burke Thompson was trying to hold him up. He overheard Cox say, "Remember, he fired first," before Thompson shushed him up and said, "It's all right." And then they went and sat down. They got off at Sol Cohn's saloon. Went in there. So they went right to the king of Black Bottom, the most connected man in the district. And ironically, it was Sol Cohn who called the police. Apparently he was, and probably with good reason, he was a little afraid that if he tried to surrender to an officer, the man might just shoot him first and ask questions later. So he called the cops at the Central Police Station and said Cox was wounded in his place and he wanted to come in and surrender. So they sent 2 patrolmen around. He was taken to the jail. He wanted to go to the hospital. They instead found that the bullet had hit him in the right forearm, in the wrist, and going completely through his forearm and out his elbow. So it was painful, but not dangerous. So he was just bandaged and put into a cell. Within short order, Burke Thompson, Owen McDonough, and his sister were all arrested, arraigned, and charged with Officer Dowell's murder. So you can tell they were not going to take any prisoners on this case. This is where the trial took place at the Davidson County Courthouse in Public Square. And it was a media sensation. It was lawyers arguing over every conceivable detail. It was one of those epic legal battles that would have made great TV drama had they had it back then. The prosecution painted a pretty straightforward picture. It was an ambush. Cox approached an unsuspecting Dowell, blew him away, and honestly, the physical evidence seemed to back them up on that. The overcoat that Dowell was wearing showed that the bullet had entered from the front and that it was most likely buttoned over his revolver at the time that he was shot. So he doesn't seem to have been prepared for anything. He managed to get the pistol out and return fire. Cox, surprisingly, didn't deny shooting Dowell on the stand. He claimed, I love giving you a beat on this one, self-defense, yes. He actually shot an officer in self-defense. His argument was he had simply gone up politely to ask the officer why he'd slapped his sister around, only to meet with this dastardly stream of oaths and then gunfire as the wily Dowell pulled his pistol and fired first and wounded him. And only then did he fire back in self-defense. As you can see, this must have been rolling eyes territory for a lot of people. This didn't make it into the book, but Ken was nice enough to send this to me. I love that. This is actually sketches done by the judge during the trial when he got bored. He was just I don't know who Charlie in his evening dress is down there at the bottom, but I love this one. One of Tom Cox's friends. As you can see, they didn't make much of an impression on the stand, at least to the judge right there. The overcoat, the cigar chomping and everything like that. It reminds me of a cartoon I one time saw this big tough dude on the stand looking directly at the prosecuting attorney and saying, "Then I fainted." I mean, it literally is this stream of these underworld types coming through this courtroom. And this is one of those moments, a photograph just can't catch it. This is just one of those moments in time that really brings it to life for me. But at any rate, it was going to go badly for the prosecution, though, excuse me, for the prosecution at first, because Cox actually told an interesting story about self-defense, and then he had a witness come and take his part. Jim Morris took the stand in support of Cox, saying that before Cox approached Dowell, he already had unbuttoned his coat and put his hand on his pistol, and that he actually did draw first and shoot him. So things were looking a little shady for the defense or for the prosecution at that point. The prosecution was surprised because they'd never heard of Jim Morris before this. He certainly wasn't on the list of witnesses, so they sent a team around to the Morris household to question the family. And the following morning, and this is literally a Perry Mason moment, this isn't supposed to happen except on TV, the Morrises were put on the stand to testify that Jim had been with them the night in question and never left the house. Jim was once more brought to the stand and examined and admitted, yes, I've been paid by some of the saloon men to testify for Cox and say that Dowell had shot first. Several more defense witnesses were eventually convicted of perjury, and their case immediately went down in flames. They later said that they were imposed upon by the witness, and the judge seems to have reacted much like he did with his doodles there. It was kind of an eye-rolling moment. Eventually, Tom Cox was found guilty of murder in the first degree with mitigating circumstances. The circumstances were not mitigating enough. He was sentenced to hang. However, his team did take it all the way to the Supreme Court. Now, you would think, saloon man, connected, underworld, all that, too much heat was on this one. Nobody was going to touch it. The Supreme Court was probably the last place they wanted to go with this because they upheld the conviction, and Cox was scheduled to swing in the spring of 1905. They called in every favor they could, even took his case to the governor. In fact, Cox in his jail cell is completely calm when he's talking about it to the reporters. He just thinks the fix is in, and eventually something's going to happen to get him off. The governor finally weighed in on it. His last hope was executive clemency, and the governor announced his decision. He would not intervene. Tom Cox would hang. He never made it. The morning of May 3rd, 1905, 2 days before he was supposed to hang, he was found in his cell, writhing in agony, bathed in sweat, deathly ill. Eventually, under some questioning, he admitted that he had swallowed red mercury oxide, which is, I've looked up the symptoms, it is a really painful, nasty way to go. Where he got it is still a mystery to this day. He claimed a former cellmate had left it with him. More likely, somebody smuggled it to him. But either way, Tom Cox went out of his way to cheat the hangman, and he eventually did. He lasted for 15 hours in that jail cell. Toward the end, he was in such agony that he admitted to his mother that the pain was excruciating, and it probably would have been better had he just gone ahead and hanged. So you really can't have much sympathy for Tom, but it's a rough way to check out. He died that night at 8 p.m., surrounded by a grieving family. And despite all he'd done during his life, his funeral was well attended. He left many fond friends. Many of them showed up for the funeral. I was struck by the irony that he was divorced. He committed suicide. He was denied extreme unction on his deathbed. He had shot 4 or 5 people and killed 2, excuse me. And yet, he's buried at Calvary Cemetery today, so how they managed, maybe the fix was in even to the last, but he did get a Catholic burial, and it's a faith that he didn't exactly embrace in life, although he was nominally Catholic at that point. There was one final bit of justice, and this didn't actually make it into the book. I found this out after it went to press. One little piece of justice would be meted out. August 4th, 1906, during the shenanigans surrounding the hotly contested election of the county sheriff, Bert Thompson got into a dispute with O.N. Yeaman. Yeaman was the brother of a former Nashville police officer who was now running for sheriff. Thompson was later found dead on Union Street of a gunshot wound, and Yeaman was tried and accused of, or charged with murder, but he was acquitted. And despite the evidence that later came out that Thompson, before he was shot, had been struck in the back of the neck so hard that it was initially thought the neck was broken. So somebody knocked him down with a club of some sort and then shot him on the sidewalk. Whether the death really was in self-defense, had something to do with the election, or was payback for Benjamin Dowell, or was all of the above, it's hard to say. But once again, one more little incident happening. It's almost like a mob vendetta when you get down to it, this give and take on the streets of Nashville. And as long as it happened in Black Bottom, it was nobody else's business in those days. So it's one of these things where there's these stories that go around that we often don't hear about today. However, not all of them are this detailed. Not all of them start like this. The Tom Cox thing, if you go to look for it, you'll find it. Tom Cox and Ben Dowell. All you have to do is open up the newspapers at that point, and boom, it was big news at the time. It's in every paper. The courts are full of it. Everything like that. What about these stories that aren't? And these are the ones that I really love. And this archive was wonderful in helping me solve one of the more intriguing mysteries of post-Civil War Nashville. And he's a forgotten character, and I wish people knew more about him. He's a pioneer. But exactly what he's a pioneer of is a little odd, so it's an acquired taste. But we have a first, and we have many firsts here in Nashville. We're going to talk about the life and death of Prince Greer, who was a fascinating character. This whole story started with one throwaway comment I found on another project 10 or 15 years ago. At that time, I was working on the tour for the Nashville City Cemetery, and they have. They were doing something about they wanted a Civil War connection in there, and I thought, well, William R. Cornelius, he's perfect right there. He's not actually buried in the cemetery, but Cornelius was the government undertaker in Nashville during the Civil War. During his career, he buried 33,000 people. That's what his obituary said. 13,000 of them were buried during the Civil War. They were U.S. soldiers that came through his establishment. So he had the official government contract and buried these men in the city cemetery. And during his memoirs, writing in 1892, he told an interesting story about one of his employees that was with him at that point in time. That, by the way, is Cornelius and Company's. It might surprise you to see he was actually a cabinet maker. And people wonder, well, why is he an undertaker? Well, think about it too. Furniture manufacturers, funeral undertakers, and dealers in Fisk's metallic burial cases. He made coffins, and eventually that became the bulk of his business, and he just went into this business. That at the bottom is the city cemetery where he did most of his work. Cornelius worked there for 5 or 6 years and kept meticulous records. But in his memoirs, he mentions an interesting character who came to him during the war, a man named Prince Greer. Prince was born just Prince, a slave. He said he was from Texas, according to what Cornelius remembered. I don't know if a lot of these details are completely accurate, but this is Cornelius' version. He said he came to my establishment after the Battle of Fort Donelson. By the way, I don't know if it's this battle or the one that happened in 1863. There were 2 battles of Fort Donelson. So at some point, apparently a Texas officer was killed, and Prince came to the establishment with him. Basically, he was given the contract to embalm this man's body, send it back to Texas to the family through the lines. Prince, as his slave, was given the option to go with the body to Texas, which he probably not too politely declined. He didn't want to go back to Texas, but that left him with a problem. Prince was just basically hanging around the undertaker's establishment. They didn't know what to do with him. He had nowhere to go. So essentially, to scare him off, they decided, well, why don't we teach him how to embalm? They took Prince aside and said, hey, you want to learn this? To their shock, he was good at it. And he rolled up his sleeves, he got to work. And in Cornelius' own words, he said he became one of my best and most trusted employees during the war. As far as we know, he adopted the last name Greer, supposedly from his former master. That's another problem, is looking through the civil records. I can't find a Texas officer named Greer who died at Fort Donelson. So this is still a bit of a mystery here, where the Greer came from and everything. But Prince Greer was there. And Prince turned out to be the first, as far as the records go, the first African-American embalmer in U.S. history. All from an accident, ending up at Cornelius' establishment. But then he says something interesting about Prince's later years. He said after the war was over, he got out of the embalming business. He went into business for his own. He said he became a coach driver, driving a coach in Nashville, and was later murdered, supposed murdered by poisoned by his wife, although nothing was proven. What? That stuck with me. You can imagine, I couldn't pursue Prince at the time. We were looking at Cornelius, but I was like, wow, what happened? And how are we ever going to find this out? I was thinking, this is going to be so obscure. Prince Greer, African-American coach driver in Nashville. I don't even have a name. I have a name. I have some vague details. I don't even have a date of death. Then one day, on a whim, I happened to be looking through the records of, there's another, just to tell you what the, the business was that they were in those days. It was cutthroat business these days. These guys undercut each other. And it was the first time they had to do this business, by the way. The reason it took off during the Civil War is, for the first time, you have Illinois and Indiana farm boys that need to be sent home. Normally, death was handled on site. You died on a battlefield, you're buried on a battlefield. But in Nashville, it was a base camp. So the reason the business was so good was a lot of people wanted their loved one home again, not buried in southern soil. So a lot of folks got sent all the way to Wisconsin or Chicago or New York. And that was where the business came from. It was a brand new market in 1863 when Prince joined it. Well, he became a coachman. Well, that was the interesting thing because I was looking through the records of Mount Ararat Cemetery. And if you're not familiar with Mount Ararat, it is one of the tragedies of Nashville preservation. It's on Elm Hill Pike. It is it's the largest and most prominent African-American cemetery in the city of Nashville. It was the Victorian burying ground for those of that community during segregation. Today, it's in shambles. It's in, I think the county, I really do think the county Potter's Field is in better shape than Mount Ararat. It's in neglect. It is owned, it's not open for business anymore, but not preserved. It's just kind of a forgotten relic of the past out there. And going through those records, I thought, well, maybe there's a chance. Maybe we'll find something. I was always discouraged because it was in such bad shape. I was thinking, did the records even survive? Lo and behold, there they were. The Victorian records survived, and they're in good shape. So I thought, well, let's just, on a whim, let's look through it. Lo and behold, looking through an alphabetized list, I found Prince Greer, November 22nd, 1884, age 40, born in South Carolina. Interesting. So I was like, well, he's not from Texas. Next thing in, occupation, hackman. Drives a coach, a hack, a cab. Cause of death, prussic acid poisoning. Oh, well, now this is convincing. This is him, got to be. So I start looking through. This, by the way, is the site today. This is where he's buried. He does not have a headstone. He does not have any, half the people that are in, more than half the people that are here don't have a headstone anymore. When I was out there taking this picture, literally somebody was running a pipe through the cemetery on this side. I was like, I really hope there's nobody buried there, but it's hard to tell because so many of the stones are missing or lost now. So this is where his last resting place is, with a lot of the prominent African-American community of Nashville in the Victorian era. So I have a name, and now I have a date. November 20, excuse me, I said 22nd, it was the 24th. November 24th, 1884, good. Maybe, I thought, there's one chance, maybe one of the newspapers, it's an African-American man in segregated Nashville. It's not a lot of chance that you're gonna find much, no detail. But maybe someone's gonna mention, you know, a little snippet. Prince Greer died or something like that. Lo and behold, two papers, the World and the American, not only covered the entire coroner's inquest and printed it line by line, verbatim, what was taken down at the coroner's inquest. And there's the final problem about trying to find him. You can see there's a discrepancy. The sudden death of Prince Graham, a well-known colored hackman surrounded with mystery which a coroner's jury looks to unravel. This is one of those things I really can't unravel yet. Prince had a rather twisted family life. It was not pleasant. He was married to a woman named Josephine after the Civil War. They were married, then they were divorced, then they were married again. So his wife's name was Josephine. I was thinking, okay, well, Josephine must have done him in. No, Josephine apparently had a very quiet, normal life. Actually, it's a woman named Molly Graham that he's living with at the time he died. I don't know if he changed the name to hide from his wife or if some other reason, or maybe he just in that fluid thing of ex-slaves, you know, sometimes not wanting to be reminded of their masters or something, changing their name. For whatever reason, he lived and he was buried as Prince Greer. He died as Prince Graham. All of his neighbors and even his live-in wife, or his live-in girlfriend at the time, testify at the coroner's inquest, and not one of them calls him Greer. They all call him Graham. So he was, for whatever reason, living on Lincoln Alley, number 277, as Prince Graham Hackman. The day in question, he had been down, as he normally was, at the Louisville and Nashville train station trying to get fares. He had a very tempestuous relationship with Molly, the woman he was living with, his girlfriend, common law wife. I don't know exactly what her status would be. They call her his wife in the paper. Apparently, they fought all the time. Most recently, on the Thursday before this happened, she was overheard saying, "Damn you," she said, "I'll land you in hell by Saturday night." And she screamed it so loud that the milkman overheard her saying it. Well, ironically, he was dead that Saturday. And apparently what happened was that morning he'd gone to the Louisville and Nashville station. He was actually talking to a relative about his troubles with Molly. He said, "I've got a heap of trouble with my old lady at home." And the man said, "You better get away from her." He said, "She's going to do you in one of these days." And it was the old story. He said, "I know, but I can't help it. I love her." He went home that night. He put the hack up. He put the team of horses up. 40 minutes later, he was dead. Molly seemed to have been the most unconcerned person in the house at that point in time. All the neighbors were frantically trying to save Prince's life. She was just basically taking notes. And when the coroner's jury, you find an interesting thing in the coroner's jury. There's another interesting twist to this one right there. It says, suspicion strongly points to his white wife. What? Well, it turns out she wasn't white. She was mixed race, but light enough that most people who saw her swore she was white on first sight. Even the reporters were stunned by this. You get an image of a woman who was too white for the African American community and too African American for the white community. She's an interesting person, born a slave in Alabama, but looked almost white. And she doesn't help her case very much by being extremely unpleasant to just about everybody she came in contact with. She was half his age. He was 44, she was 21. I mean, you can see the fatal attraction going on here. And during her testimony before the coroner's jury, she's the only one who said she was a caring, loving wife that did everything she could to take care of her poor husband. And he came home sick, and she just couldn't save him and everything. Everybody else testified. She just basically sat there and said, "If you want to go help him, go help him." You know, that was her attitude during this whole thing. They did find a coffee pot and a whiskey bottle in the room, and they assumed that basically she had slipped something into that coffee pot or that whiskey bottle. That was the going theory of the coroners. The testimony, from the testimony and the symptoms described, they thought it was prussic acid. If you don't know what prussic acid is, it's liquid cyanide. That's all it is. Basically, if you've used Prussian blue, I'm an artist. If you use Prussian blue, it's one molecular molecule away from being cyanide. It won't hurt you, but that's how close chemistry runs sometimes. It's basically, that's why they call it Prussian, because it's blue in its native state. So prussic acid is what she used, apparently. And they sent his stomach off to be analyzed for the poison, and then 2 days later, when the results came back, they confirmed prussic acid had been there. They arrested Molly right there. Interestingly enough, during the 2 days when this was still being debated, the coffee pot and the whiskey bottle disappeared. The murder weapon was never found. So Molly at least had the sense enough to know something was in the wind and get rid of anything that might tie her to something like this. She was taken down. She was put on, she was taken down to the, not to the courthouse this time, but to the city hall, where she was arraigned for murder. And for several months, she lived in a jail cell and basically went back and forth between the city hall until they finally had to admit the truth. They didn't have enough evidence to charge her. He died of cyanide poisoning, but the question is, how did it get into his system? Was it poison? Was it suicide? Was it murder? Was it something else? They couldn't accident. Who knows? Unfortunately, with no witnesses, they didn't have enough to charge Molly. So Molly was basically sent back to her jail cell, where it looked like nature was about to take its hand because she had caught some kind of jail fever. By the way, the Davidson County Jail, it was on Front Street or First Avenue, and it was a nasty place to do any business. I showed a picture of it earlier in there. It's where Tom Cox died. People drop dead of disease in there all the time. In fact, one of the cases I read about, they said that they were happy to be moved to the Tennessee State Prison because it was more healthy than the Davidson County Jail. That's how bad it was. Well, she had caught one of these illnesses, And they got a young doctor from the medical college, which acted sort of as the indigent hospital, to come over and nurse her back to health. And he kind of fell for her in a way, professionally. I'll say it wasn't untoward, but took sympathy on her. Poor me, she did her thing. Poor me, no friends, no family, nobody loves me. What is going to happen to me? So he decided, well, he'd take pity on Molly and offer her a job. They were always looking for staff at the medical college hospital. Why don't you come on down and get a job here in the kitchen as a cook? Yeah, you can see where this is going, can't you? 6 weeks after Molly Graham was hired at the Medical College Hospital, by the way, again, the Metro Nashville Archives found a wonderful photograph for me of that. She got into an argument with that doctor. She broke curfew. The doctor told her in, said, you're going to work here, you're going to follow the rules. Molly went off the handle, started yelling up and down, screaming in the hallways. She admitted during the inquest testimony she could be fractious. She was, and she went off the handle and said how she was going to fix that doctor and get even with him. The next morning, interestingly enough, now Molly was a good cook apparently, and that doctor had a weakness for spring peas. That was his favorite. She made spring peas that morning and put them out with the meal. The doctor and his buddy passed on the spring peas, so that was a no-show. However, the 6 people who did eat the spring peas were immediately stretched out on the dining room floor, writhing in agony and everything, and they had to call the doctors back in, gastric lavage, pump their stomachs, the whole 9 yards. One of them was at death's door for several days, but he pulled through. So luckily, somebody poisoned 6 people that day. This time they think with arsenic, which wasn't that hard to find in a hospital setting. Molly was immediately rearrested. She was taken down again to the jail, and then they started the proceedings again with trying to charge her with murder, or attempted murder in this case. Was it a poisoning? Was it a coincidence? Was it just like Molly herself said, rather cynically? Maybe the peas were just sour. Who knows? Well, the end of this story is a little mysterious because, in fact, there were 2 things that the archives really helped me out with this one. Is they have the criminal court record books, and they are fantastic if you're looking for they don't have a lot of detail. There's not the question and answer format. You have to go to the Supreme Court records to find that at the State Library and Archives. But in these cases, you will find who was before the docket and who was tried and what have you. And there she is, Molly Graham. By this time, 1885 or 6, I believe she was put back on trial for this incident. And I went through all the references in the book to Molly, and I finally got to the final reference where she's called before the thing. I actually had to call, and I'm going to shout her out on this. Kelly Circa works there, and she was a big help to me in finding these things. Kelly, I called her over and I said, I need another pair of eyes on this. Please read this and tell me what you think this says. And because it was a little confusing, the wording, but she looked at it, and she looked at me, and she said, it looks like they let her go. That's how I read it. Apparently, they didn't have enough to charge her a second time. So out she went, out the door. What happened to Molly? That's the question of the century, isn't it? Well, I kind of look at it like the Jack the Ripper case. Most people will tell you about Jack the Ripper. They still don't know who did it. But there's 3 possibilities with somebody like that. 1, they were arrested soon after and stopped their crimes that way. 2, they were locked up in a mental hospital and stopped their crimes that way. Or 3, they died, one or the other. So what happened to Molly? Well, she doesn't show up again in Nashville, under that name at least. But there's a good possibility, I think, to maybe more due diligence might find another mysterious rash of poisonings in another city, under another name or something like that. It's quite possible we're looking at the beginning of some serial killer who went out and tried it again under another name somewhere else. All we know is she didn't try it again here in Nashville. I think her luck had run out. So I like to think of it that way when I think of the end of the Molly Graham story. Certainly, I don't think she's the kind who forgave and forgot when she got angry. So there's a good possibility we're looking at the beginning of a story here and not the end of one. But that story has a title, and that also is thanks to Kelly, because I had to, this is the most amazing thing, is I didn't have a good title for that chapter or that little section on the book, and I was like, well, it was like deadly romance or something melodramatic, something that looks good in print, everything. And Kelly looked up at me and she said, sounds like a toxic relationship to me. So I apologize, I totally stole that, but it worked. It was so perfect right there. So this is, you can find this one in the book too under A Toxic Relationship. And I owe all credit to her for that. But those are just some samples of some of what I've uncovered doing this. And these are two cases where the Metro archives were really intrinsic in solving these stories. I wouldn't have been able to find the answers, especially in the Molly Graham case, to the who, what, when, and where, and what eventually happened. Even though that one's still open-ended, it gave me enough clues to where I think we've got the start of something that is due some more research. And to me, that's the sign of good, successful research, is when you end up opening more questions than you answer. So if you're interested in getting the book, now here's the embarrassing part for me, is I've been telling some folks earlier about this, is normally I'd have them to sell at something like this. I was planning to have them to sell. My publisher couldn't get them. That is a great problem to have. They literally said, oh, we can't get them back into stock until at least Thursday. And so that was last Thursday, and they haven't showed up. So unfortunately, I can't sell them to you today, but you can get them on Amazon. You can get them at like Barnes & Nobles and Franklin. The bookstores will have them and everything. So if you do get one and you see me somewhere, and I'm usually at one of these archives, and I'll sign it, but just you'll have to catch me. I can't sign a Kindle either, so print books are better. But basically, do want to end with that apology and open up the floor to questions about some of these twisted roads that we've gone down. So are there any questions about anything? Yes, ma'am.
Do you have any follow-up on Nellie Cox?
Any follow-up on her?
Yeah, any idea what?
There is a relation online, and she's lovely, and I cannot remember her name. She's actually contacted me once by email, and she's done more research on the Coxes than anybody. In fact, she's found most of this in the papers. And I was looking at her website earlier today saying that same question, what happened to Nellie? She doesn't know. She assumes she apparently was remarried and moved away from Nashville, or I don't know if she moved away from Nashville. Some of the Coxes moved out of town. Owen McDonough did. But apparently she remarried to another man later on. And according to what she was able to find, she apparently was still alive in 1945, but that was the last she's found. In fact, she's on her website, she actually says, if you find anything about Nellie's later years, please send it to me. She's still up in the air, I don't know. She still in Nashville several months after the trial. I see mentions of her because she had to stand trial herself. I think she was eventually, I can't even remember if she was, I didn't follow Nellie's trail because the Cox incident was so dramatic, and I didn't have enough time to add that much into that chapter. I'm not even sure if she did any time for the perjury or for the accomplice to, or being an accomplice to the murder. I don't think she did. So she stayed in Nashville for a while, but several months later her husband moved out of town, and I assume that she moved with him, and so she might not have even been in Nashville in 1945.
I have another one.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
The police officer, the widow, any follow-up on her?
There is a little bit. I wish I had. You have a copy of the book. Would you look in the acknowledgments on the front? I have to consult my own work. I put in the acknowledgments. I thanked a lovely lady for the use of yes. Let me see here, just real quick. I'm cheating. Look at this. Looking up my own notes. Okay, here. Valerie McCauley, that is her name. Okay, there you go. Valerie McCauley was her name. She wrote me and told me a little bit about the photograph that she used on, that I used of Dowell's. She said she actually met, I believe, Allie's daughter. And from what she said in the family, she said it was a long struggle for Allie, that she was a widow alone. You know, the money ran out, the sympathy money that came in after the thing. So she had a long struggle to raise the son and everything, but she was well loved within the family, very respected, and she said she got to meet her daughter, I believe, or was it her daughter? It was like the granddaughter, something like that. It was direct descendant of Allie, and she said you could see the resemblance. So that was as close as I got to that. It was just a family anecdote about it, but enough to remind you that once the murder was done, and that was the case with so many of these stories, the healing went on. The process wasn't over. That there were so many people left behind affected on both sides, on Cox's side and on Dowell's side. In fact, that was one of the reasons I wanted to talk here and really go into that story in so much detail. Is that one really left me with that impression that, as I said, Tom Cox is a hard guy to find any sympathy for. And yet he was loved himself. His mother was heartbroken when he died. His sister was devastated and I think blamed herself for what happened. Dowell was a young man trying to do a difficult job and ends up 26 years old and dead and leaving a widow and a newborn son in an era in 1903 when that could go either way, you know. So unfortunately, I don't have a lot of personal details, and I didn't think it was my point to pry too much. I was glad she volunteered what she did about that and give me a little bit of that human touch, that photo. But it was enough to remind you of the cracks that are left after a tragedy like that. Any other?
Yep. So Brian, I'm just curious about Nashville's reaction. You know, we've got a policeman gunned down in the street, and then we've got the murderer who poisons himself. So what did Nashville do? I mean, was there any, you know, we need to beef up the police force, we need to do something about crime, we need to, we'll worry about that tomorrow? I mean.
Honestly, we'll worry about that tomorrow. Seems to have been a thing. After the drama of it and all the bodies had fallen, and Bert Thompson ends up dead and everything, you see, it's like any reform movement in America. There's a rush forward and then back, a rush forward and back. I don't think, callous as it sounds, I don't think the murder of a police officer was enough to galvanize the city into action. I think it was just considered, well, that was, in fact, there's you know, those who believe Cox, those who believe Dowell, but there is a feeling almost of a personal blood feud between the two. So I think that was really at play in that. However, there was a book, what was it called? Rivers of Blood, that came out, Rivers of Whiskey, something like that, by a former whiskey man, you know, and he says straight up in the book, I didn't quote that because it was a little inflammatory, but he says straight up that the prosecution hired the witnesses to perjure themselves on the stand, that it was all organized by the whiskey men and the saloon men. You see them starting to get more and more outraged and more angry. Later in the book, I have another chapter, and boy, I wanted to examine my head for even tackling that one, because that was the most complex thing to research in the book. And I still don't think I got it 100%, but that was the Carmack Cooper shooting in November of 1908, when former Senator Carmack was gunned down by Robin J. Cooper. That was the nail in the coffin. That was the final one. This time, they were able to make him into a martyr. You know, that was really it. Carmack is not a nice man. He is not a pleasant person to research. He is, to this day, his vicious war with Ida Wells and everything like that stands in stark contrast to the saint that Nashville has held him up to be for years. But in that era, you've got the blood of the martyr on the sidewalk, you've got the saloon men pulling in all the punches to get their guys off the hook, because literally it was a case where they were convicted of murder, and then the Coopers got executive clemency. Without even fear or favor, Governor Cox basically said, or it was Browning at that point, basically said, nope, they're off the hook. They're buddies of mine. I mean, it was that blatant at that point. So it wasn't until the corruption got to all the way up to the governor's chair, literally overnight after the Carmack Cooper debacle, you see the state legislature rise up in rebellion against their own governor. They basically will not let him pass bills. They're eventually stonewalling him and passing their own laws about this, and we lose at the same time. Horse racing, gambling, liquor, all the pet projects go in at the same time, all in direct response to the murder of Carmack, or the shooting of Carmack. I've taken to calling it that because both men fired, so I don't know if it was a murder or if it was just a really bad timing on all their parts and it was self-defense. But either way, you see that come in, and it lasts so long that I mean, it's nearly 50 years before people put cracks in that legend. If you go down Charlotte today and you see, and that's hilarious, the statue of Carmack, which nobody remembers or knows who it is. There he is looming over Charlotte, looked like he's about to take a nosedive in his big old frock coat. And that was put up in 1925. That was put up at the height of national prohibition as a monument to their fallen martyr. And you almost get the sense that people are starting to forget who Carmack is. We need to put him up. The legend is, that statue it looms like this over the sidewalk, because at the time, the steps on either side, that was how the legislators got into the Capitol building. They had to walk under the withering glare of the fallen martyr Carmack to get in there. In 1957, Lem Motlow paid for a pedestrian tunnel, so that the senators wouldn't have to walk in the rain. He was a senator himself, so he put the money up for thing, and it's the Motlow Tunnel. It's still how you get into the building today, go through the metal detectors and under Carmack statue. Goes directly under his feet. You can't even see him from in there. Motlow, if the name is familiar to you, that's the family that owned the Jack Daniels distillery at that point in time. So 50 years later, you finally see them saying, okay, it's enough worshiping Carmack. I think that was it. Yeah, by 1925, people are starting to question, was that the right decision? By 1957, it's like, okay, let's just bury that past and move on and be Nashville again. But I definitely say there's some argument to say that the Dowell Cox shooting was the first volley fired in that war, and that the final salvo came with the murder of Carmack, or the shooting of Carmack.
Brian,
Yep.
to follow up on that,
Yep.
my family came here in 1958 to run a capacitor factory, and it was Ned Carmack, Jordan Stokes, and Saunders Anglia who brought him down and to start what would be, the capacitors for transistor radios and color TV. Ned's Carmax has several relatives still here.
Does he?
And so you could follow up maybe with them and get some information.
I would be curious to hear from within the families, both Cooper and Carmack, of what happened or what their version is of it. Because again, you can only get so much from the records.
When we first moved here in '57, that's when Ned Carmack would always drive all the visitors around. We even drove Japanese people, so a couple of senators. We drove them by and showed them, see that up there? You don't mess around in Nashville. And Jordan Stokes, who, Ogden, it was a part of all that as well.
Right. So I'd love to be able to talk to them, but at the same time, sometimes I talk to the families involved in these questions. I mean, the Cox and Dowell thing was one of those heartwarming things where it was nice to talk to people who have buried their past. I was telling some people earlier, one of these stories in the book takes place in 1866, and the family is still prickly about what happened, and I can't say that I blame them, really, for the way it turned out. So sometimes it's not that pleasant when you talk to the family. Sometimes you find out things you wish you hadn't found out about, and changes the whole story. But I would love to talk to the Carmacks and the Coopers, or really anybody that is related to this. Absolutely, that'd be great. Any other questions about anything? Oh, is it?
I was just wondering about Black Bottom. So was that run by black people, where you said the Coleman, that was Jewish?
It was basically, Saul Cohen was called the king of Black Bottom. He was Jewish, born in Nashville in 1868. Saul was kind of the black sheep of a very prominent family. It's like Pearl Cohn High School, all of that, same family. He was a distant, or a cousin of that. It basically was a mixture of, there were powerful African-American people within the community, leaders both, and to give it its due, I have to say this, not all criminals. Not everybody in Black Bottom was a criminal. You can kind of look at it like the Ninth Ward in New Orleans on a smaller level. Back in the 30s, I think, or the 20s, Zora Neale Hurston lived there a while because it had this kind of vibrant culture, underground culture there, because it was the African-American community in that area. But the real, like in most vice districts, and especially in the South, the real powerful ones generally tended to be white. And Saul Cohen was definitely a white man. He kind of came to a sad end. I kind of talk about it in the book. Saul was, he got through his palmier days in the 19-teens, where he was constantly butting up against we got statewide prohibition in 1909. He stayed in the game into the 20s, so he literally was sometimes run out on the county road, the rock pile, working for the road works out there. But by mid-1920s, Saul had kind of gotten away from the seamier side of his youth. He'd made his money, he wanted to get out of it. So he kind of moved away from the rackets, or at least as much as he could. He bought a house on a Woodmont Boulevard in a nice, quiet area of town. And then in 1929, he lost everything in the stock market. And then slowly had to go back into it. Keep in mind, we didn't go to national prohibition. When national prohibition went out in '33, we kept it up until '39. And so, at least in Nashville, it became a thing where every community voted whether it was going to be prohibition or not. Well, Nashville voted to stay dry. So he got back into the liquor racket, and he was nabbed for running liquor after national prohibition was repealed. But before Nashville had, he tried to make an argument that he was running it through the state for resale in Florida, which was legal. They didn't go for it, and they gave him a year in prison for that. And then he literally, it's the saddest thing in the world. You want to talk about the end of an era. He died in 1939. 6 weeks later, Nashville voted to go wet again. If he'd lived 6 more weeks, he would have seen legal liquor crossing a counter in this community. So Saul's an interesting character. I've never even seen a photograph of him. Supposedly there is one when he was run in for his final sentencing in 1936, I think it was, just before when he finally was convicted. Supposedly a photographer snapped his photograph and he said very mildly, "Please don't do that." So I don't know if the photo even ran, but I've never seen a photo of the man, and yet he was a legend for years down in Black Bottom. And you can actually follow through the newspapers and the court records. You can see this wild young man, the black sheep of a family, you know, knifing a guy in the 1890s, slowly become almost this sad, reformed guy, and then fall right back into the rackets again, and his life comes apart at the end.
Gene Roseman has written and talked about Black Bottom to our history group in Bellevue a couple times. And I would trust her to have any photos if they do exist.
If she can find me pictures of Harry Lehman and Saul Cohen, I'd love to see pictures of them because
She talked about all the May family and the extension of the family and all why they all settled up and down Charlotte Avenue.
Right. I'd like to talk to her as well because that's for obvious reasons. These people were rather camera shy in their youth, and when they showed up at the courthouse, and I think by that point everybody kind of felt sorry for Saul. So I'm pretty sure the guy snapped the photograph and it never even ran in the papers. It would have been the Tennessean that took the picture. I've never found it. So it's a mystery sometimes. You know, you're dealing with these people and you don't even know what they look like.
Was Black Bottom like kind of a Jewish area too?
No,
If you go on like 5th or 3rd, next to grading equipment, I remember.
Right.
There's like this old brick building, and up at the top, the stone, it has Hebrew lettering,
Right.
Arabic, and so workers.
There were,
something up there.
Like any other poor district in the country, you would have found Jewish folk there, you would have found Irish Catholic, you would have found black, you would have found white, you would have found immigrants in that area. It would have been a teeming, almost like Lower East Side kind of thing, heavily African American, but not exclusively. It wasn't that the Jewish folks lived there, but there were several Jewish businesses. And like I said, Harry Lehman was Jewish, Saul Cohen was Jewish, the Thompsons and the Coxes were Irish Catholic. You can see kind of that saloon culture, microcosm of the East Side of New York in Nashville at that time. And that seems to have been common at that point in time. It's that next group moving up. At that point, just as a general overview of the underworld in America in 1900, the Irish Catholics were becoming established and respectable and moving out. The Jewish American community was coming up in their wake. The Italian American community was coming up behind them. And so basically you were starting to see the dawn of Prohibition, which is like every gangster movie you've ever seen, where you've got the fellow with the Jewish last name, the Italian last name. That's based in part on that truth, that in that era at that time, that was where these communities kind of evolved around. So I'd like to know more about it myself. I found there's only one building that I think may have something to do with Black Bottom left that I've seen, and that's on the corner of Chestnut and 4th, I think it is. There's that nice little store that's there. If it was a drugstore for years. But I can't find anything about it before 1910. Then it became a drugstore, which is about the time Black Bottom was starting to become respectable again. I was like, well, what was it? It's definitely dates from the 1890s, so what happened before that? I don't know. So that one's interesting to me. It seems to me there's some hidden past behind that building, and I'd love to know if that's the last remaining vestige of Black Bottom. But like everything else, it seems the city just doesn't want to remember its bumps. It forgot about Black Bottom. Hell's Half Acre would last into the 1960s. There's some wonderful photographs of the state senators touring it in the 1965, walking down in their nice suits and everything. Tar paper shacks. I mean, it looks like a photo of Manhattan in 1860. It's just that primitive down there. And then soon after that, they put the legislation through, bulldozed it out, and put eventually Bicentennial Mall and all the farmers market and all that went through there. But it raises that question, well, where did those people go? It's not like they could just get on a bus and go to another city. They had no money, so they moved somewhere, and then East Nashville, and then into Antioch, and then so we also have that model too, kicking our neighborhoods around and reshaping it as the population ebbs and flows. And I've seen that going back to the 1850s in this town. It really isn't a new phenomenon in Nashville. Any others? Well, thank you very much for having me and putting up with me and all these things. And I appreciate it. And buy my book. You'll have to do it on Amazon.
Well, thanks, Brian. Listen, I appreciate you being here.
Absolutely.
And
Thanks for
so,
having
yeah,
me.
great. Folks, that's it. Remember May 2nd and the 2 exhibits we have going. So have a great afternoon. We appreciate you being here.